Hello there, and welcome to my presentation on improving decision making through the visual system, focusing specifically on show jumpers in this case, but it could easily be applied to all walks of the equine industry. So the aim of this presentation is to highlight how eye tracking technology can make a significant impact on performance in show jumping and other areas of the equine industry. So during this presentation, I'm going to highlight what decision making is. It's more complex than people give it credit for. So there's a lot of process, and it's really important that we highlight the different stages of it. Highlight the importance of the visual system in that process. Then go through some clear applications. So I'm going to show you some footage of how the eye tracker can be used and applied, and then also where I'm thinking of going with this technology and how it can be applied further. So I thought I'd just give a brief introduction as to who I actually am, because I'm very well aware that I come across as this bobbing head on these PowerPoint slides. So I'm Lee Waters. I've been teaching, coaching, been in the applied world for roughly around 20 years now in a variety of different settings, whether that be in further education, higher education here in the UK, in applied settings, working in the likes of ice hockey, where I work with the International Ice Hockey Federation, and I work with their officials going through various scenarios and mainly in World Championship games. So I've travelled a fair bit to the likes of Finland, to the likes of Switzerland, Sweden, those kind of places, soon to be Romania, to see what officials are doing live during the actual games from an eye tracking perspective. How do they use their visual system to make the decisions that they do? It has been so cool to be able to see it, and they are world first projects. They've never been done before, so we're leading the way in that regard. I'm also doing the same kind of thing with the England Cricket Board, with their umpires, seeing what they do during live games, and also leading a world first research project in the world of show jumping, which is something I'm going to share with you further on in this presentation. I feel it's really important that I get across here that actually I used to hate academia. I didn't like research. I didn't like, in its true sense anyway, I didn't like education, and it was typically because it was never explained to me in a way that I could really relate to. So one of the biggest things about my practice is I try and make it as applied as possible. So everything I do, I try and make it as easy to understand and applicable as possible. So whoever's going to use it can actually use it in the settings that they are going to be ultimately judged. And that's something that is a key part of my practice, because I like scenario-based learning. I don't like drills, isolated drills. And that's typically because I feel that those isolated drills, especially from a visual perspective, take away key pieces of information or key parts of the environment that people need to have in order to train properly, to get used to performing in the arenas that they should be. So what is decision making? They are the most important cognitive process we go through. Think about all of the decisions that you've made already today. You're literally making one now as to whether to carry on listening to me or not. Or maybe you decided that 2 minutes ago and you've already switched off from me. But they are incredibly important, and like I say, I argue that they are the most important cognitive process. They are a big factor into why we are successful or not. They also show our development, good and bad. If you're after a definition, it is a complex process that involves the selection of an action or a series of actions based on a given situation. And that sounds quite fancy, so let's break that down a little bit further. What is the processes that are involved in decision making? So obviously, considering the nature of this presentation, we're going to talk about the eyes and the visual system. Now, you may find it a little bit strange that I've talked about the eyes and the visual system as two separate things, because they are. The eyes we'll talk about things as in your eyesight. Your eyesight is the clarity in which you see things, so how clearly you can see these PowerPoint slides right now. But the visual system is a little bit more complex than that. We're not just thinking about the clarity in which we see things, we're then thinking about the interpretation of what people see. Because you can see these PowerPoint slides as much as you want, or as clearly as you want. However, if you don't know what the words mean, if you don't know what the letters mean, then you can see them as clearly as you want. However, they won't necessarily help you. Gaze behavior is a fancy way of saying how your eyes move or how your head moves to focus on different pieces of information around your given scenario. And I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like in the coming slides. It is often forgotten that memory is a key part of your decision-making process, and emotions are too. Once again, we're going to focus on those a little bit later in the presentation. But I just want to reiterate that memory is an incredibly important part of decision making. Now, where are our memories made? Typically, they are made during performance when we're talking about that. And a lot of that is done within training. I previously said that I don't necessarily like drills or isolated drills anyway. Now, if our memories are an incredible part of our decision making process, and all we have trained in is isolated drills that are not related to the scenario that we are expected to perform in, how can we possibly rely on the memories that we have built up during training to assist us in our decision-making processes during performance? This is where I'm coming from when I'm talking about not necessarily using isolated drills. So I'm going to show you the journey that I've been on in specifically the world of show jumping in regards to eye tracking. So first and foremost, what I needed to make sure was that eye tracking could be used in the world of show jumping. I was confident it could be, but it needed to be tested. And more importantly, was it safe? Okay, so was it safe for the horse rider to be wearing it? Now, there have been multiple times where there have been incidents, as you can imagine, horses not wanting to go over jumps, or there were slight missteps and riders have started to come off saddles and things like that. There's been various incidents where that's happened. However, one, the eye track has been perfectly safe, and two, more importantly, the rider has been perfectly safe too. So let's have a watch of the first eye tracking footage taken from the rider's perspective. So as you can see on the right hand side here, the red dot represents exactly where the horse rider is looking when they're going over this jump. Now this was a successful attempt, a very, very successful attempt. They just went straight over, no problems whatsoever. Now on the left hand side, you're about to see an unsuccessful attempt. Notice the difference. Now I'm going to be quiet now and just see what you see. Okay, so that was an unsuccessful attempt. Now, did you notice the distinct differences in the visual patterns between the two attempts? Same rider, same day, same jump, just from a different angle. Did you notice the differences? So in the successful attempt, you can see that it was much, much more purposeful, it was much more stable, and also leading up to the jump, they were focused on the center of the jump. On the unsuccessful attempt, it was much more unstable. It was, for want of a better phrase, bobbing around. And also, when it came to the jump, they were also focusing on the right-hand side of the jump, which is ironically where the horse hit the fence and the fence came down. So interestingly here, we were able to see from the first attempt of using the eye tracker, there is actually a difference between successful and unsuccessful attempts from a visual perspective. So it's also really important to think about that we have primary or core visual skills. So we're not just talking about a red dot jumping around a screen. We're also talking about what skill level are these individuals at from a different perspectives. So, for example, dynamic visual acuity. Can you see on the move? Obviously, for horse riders, this is a very, very important skill to have. If you can't see on the move, then you are going to be in problems when you are starting to try and take in information. So this is an important skill to develop. Focusing. Do you have an ability to focus on things that are close to you and far away? In a show jumping scenario, are you able to focus on the fence that you are coming to, but also where you're planning to place the horse or position the horse after the fence, and then ultimately to the next fence, which is further away? Can you focus that far clearly? Depth perception. Are you able to judge distances quickly? This is something that is incredibly important within the world of show jumping, within the world of riding as a whole, regardless of the discipline. Eye alignment. Do both eyes work together and work together at the same time? This is something that the eye tracker can pick up, and it can pick up what's known as eye dominance. Do you use your peripheral vision? Now, peripheral vision is talked about a lot once again, but peripheral vision is essentially made up of multiple what's called fixation points. Do you stop and notice or focus on key pieces of information in your environment to build up a knowledge or a blueprint, let's say, of the environment you're in? And then eye tracking. And we're not talking eye tracking in the sense that we're truly talking about it here, but are you able to track things or objects on the move? So the next part of the journey was to see whether the eye tracker worked perfectly fine in an outdoor setting. So previously we worked indoors, but a lot of show jumping events happen outdoors. So do they perform the same? Let's find out. So this was a perfectly sunny day, a really sunny day. Arguably, you couldn't be more sunny than this in the UK. And as you can see from the footage here, they worked perfectly fine. They worked 100%. Going through the visual skills that we've just highlighted, you can see depth perception, you can see focusing, you can see the ability to see on the move, so dynamic visual acuity, and it is really, really interesting to see the focus points of this rider going round. They're checking the jump early, they're checking that they're in the right position, speed, etc. And also they are looking at this rider is specifically looking at the top of the fence in the center. Once they are locked in, they can then focus past the fence. Interestingly though, that has not always been the case when using these on riders. So how have I been able to do this? So I've mentioned that we're using eye tracking technology. So what does it look like? It looks like this, which is on the screen here. So on the left hand side is actually a rider using the original concept, or what they call Toby 2s, so second generation eye tracker. The first generation eye tracker was a lot bigger, and you used to have to wear a backpack on your back, with a laptop in it, and that just would not be safe for wearing it in horse riding. You also looked a little bit like a Ghostbuster as well, so it wasn't exactly very good looking, so to speak. Eye tracking's been around for roughly about 150 years or so, maybe a little bit less than that. The original conception literally touched the eyeball, so as the eyeball moved, the piece of equipment moved as well. So that was not very nice. It was also half the size of a decent sized room, so definitely wouldn't be able to use that on a horse rider. The ones that I'm using now, though, predominantly are the ones on the right-hand side. So the three pictures on the right-hand side, these are the Tobii 3s, and these are the world-leading eye trackers in the world, and they work by having cameras that are focused on the eye, which lights up our central fovea through infrared. That then has a camera that points out, sends a Wi-Fi signal back to a device like a laptop, a mobile phone, or a tablet, and software does its thing, and they put the pieces of information together, and we're able to see exactly what the person is looking at any given point. We can see it live, so as they are going around the show jumping course, I can see what they're doing live, and also retrospectively. So when we are then giving feedback, we can then quickly show the rider what they have just done, which is actually depicted in the left hand side. So this rider is looking quickly at what they have just done, and we're going through some feedback as to how potentially she can improve in the next round. So the next point in the journey was to obviously see whether this could be useful during multiple jumps. Obviously, previously we've only done one jumps and two jumps, and that would go against the way in which I liked to train, because there are obviously more than one or two jumps during a show jumping course. So here we have a show jumper going through a 10 jump course. Now you will notice that there is sound on this video, and that is because the eye tracker can also record audio. It's quite interesting to use in certain settings, specifically within the likes of ice hockey, within the likes of cricket, rugby, that kind of thing, because you hear communications and such like. It's not always that useful within this setting. At least I haven't necessarily found it all that useful, other than to for the rider to display a little bit of disgruntlement when they've potentially not done as well as they could do. Now, going round the course, you can see that the rider is trying to check the jump early. In this instance, they are typically focusing on the top of the fence, mainly in the middle. And then as soon as they get locked in, they typically are focusing then away from the fence, working out where they are then going to put the horse. So as they're going through, you can notice that also from the audio that there is a bit more fatigue being experienced from the rider through the deep breathing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But you can see from this how the rider uses their eyes and to guide them around the course, and that is incredibly useful, incredibly insightful, because if you think about from a training perspective, if you have been working on something specifically with your show jumpers to say we need to check the jump early, or we need to check the top fence, we need to go through different perspectives, how do you know if they are actually doing that? Because you don't, unless you put an eye tracker on. This tells us exactly what they're doing with their visual system, which is absolutely amazing. Now, I mentioned earlier that actually this is the common thing of checking the center of the top of the fence and then moving on is something that we've seen. It's not the only thing that we've seen. So one of the methods that has been used is actually tracking the floor along to the bottom of the fence, metaphorically jumping the fence with their eyes, and then going past the fence onto the next one, so that once they go over it physically with the horse. Another one was actually looking at the fence, staying locked into the fence, and not actually moving past the fence until they physically jumped it. So there's typically three ways that has been observed during this research that we've been doing, and also in the applied practice of working with multiple show jumpers themselves. We all know how stressful a show jumping course can be, or any riding in some instances can be. So it's really important to mention the importance of emotions in this sense. We all go through what's known as a stress process. We all see the situation that we're in. We appraise that situation. We weigh it up. Is it important to us? Do we feel like we have the skills in order to be able to deal with that situation? If we feel like we do, have the skills, then we typically don't have much of a stress response. However, if we feel like we're lacking in something, we feel like we are very attached to this situation, or find this situation really important, but we feel that we're not up to scratch to deal with it, then typically that is where we will have a stress response. Why is that important? Because it really affects this part of the brain, the prefrontal lobe or cortex, depending on which side of the pond you're from. But ultimately what happens is that this becomes significantly stressed. This is the decision-making center of the brain. It becomes less effective, and in essence what happens is it shrinks. It loses its capacity to be able to make decisions, and it can last for up to 20 seconds. Now imagine what can happen during horse riding events in 20 seconds. So much can happen. So what we are needing to do is to understand the effects that this stress process is having on the visual system. And what we are finding is that it is leading to people not seeing as much as what they need, and it really is leading to the phrase of seeing is not always seeing. Because if you ever looked at something but you've not actually fully taken in what that surroundings is, you've gone into a room looking for your keys and you absolutely adamant that your keys are not in there, you walk away, you come back in, and lo and behold, there they are. Typically you probably would have seen them because they're on your coffee table in the middle of the room, but you sometimes have not registered it, and that's what's happening. Mini stress responses are having real profound effects on our visual system. And how does that look? We start to go through something called cognitive load, and this is moving on to the future. So as you can see on the left hand side, there's a graph with spikes. As the spike gets higher up, that means that the brain is working higher at its highest capacity. So on the right hand side you can see the eye tracker, and on the left hand side you can see what is going on with the brain function, what is going on with how much the brain is having to work. So this is going to be really important moving forward when it comes to training, when it comes to understanding the effects of performance, the effects of training, the effects on what it's like in competition. Because actually, if we can put the two together, we will have a much more evidence-based approach in order to prepare our riders to perform to the best that they can be. So here ends my presentation, and I hope that this has been useful for you, or at least insightful. It's only an introduction into the concept. This is only literally just scratching millimeters of the surface. There's so much more to discuss, there's so much more to apply, there's so much more to get into, and if you are interested, please get in touch with the contact details provided, and let's do some amazing things in this regard, because you can't outperform your preparation, and the key to decision making, or successful, consistent, effective decision making, is the visual system. And if we don't focus on it, how can we possibly improve the decisions of our show jumpers? Thank you for listening, and I hope you have found it useful.